Well, hey everyone, Tom Haren here, and I'm eager to share about the book that I read about the life of John and Betty Stam and a story of triumph. And I'm excited to share about them. Dr. Hilder said to make sure that these videos are not boring because we'll watch one another, and they made that easy because they lived fascinating lives. And so a little bit about them. John grew up, his father met the Lord, and it changed their entire family tree, and he raised them in a very godly home. That's important because his godly influence, John had many siblings, and his father Peter would make them all read a passage of scripture, discuss it before their meals. And so these investments and these dividends paid into John's life later on. We'll see, as he had a very godly foundation in his life. John met the Lord at age 15 at their family mission called the Star of Hope mission, where a blind evangelist came, shared the gospel. John met the Lord, surrendered, and he began into the business realm in his early adulthood, and God clearly called him to foreign missions in China during that time. And so he shifted from the business world into going to get his seminary studies at Bible Moody Institute in Chicago. And this is important because this would be where he meets the woman that will change his life forever. So before we get too far in their story together, let's meet her. This is Betty Scott. Betty was raised in China. It was an American family on mission there, and she was raised and learned the language, learned the culture, and this planted a seed in her heart that never left. She was always called to the people of China. She came back to the States when she was 17, went to Wilson College in Pennsylvania for her undergrad, and later would wind up at Moody as well. And we can see how quickly this happens as their paths cross at Moody a year in for John, and they met at a mission, a Bible study that prayed for the mission, for the China Inland Mission. And so they would meet, talk, have social hour, and the relationship progressed from there until it got very serious. Although Betty she graduated first and headed to China in 1931, and they made the decision after talking to the couple that led this study to go unengaged. And so John graduates shortly after, about 8 months, and he heads there as well. And the China Inland Mission had them in separate cities. So they were in China, apart, doing great ministry together, thriving, and they wouldn't see each other again until the night before their marriage, which was October 25th, 1933. And so it's a whirlwind of events. Once they get married, they get pregnant 3 months in with sweet baby Helen, Priscilla. She is actually born in 1934, and that's where things really get wild in this story. She is born, she's about 3 months old. They're doing ministry together. They're ministering to the Chinese people who they know and love so much. And a group called the Red Forces, which is a communist group of soldiers that really were out to persecute, particularly believers. They come and they capture John. He's arrested. This is 1934. The next day, they get Betty and Helen and get her as well, and bring them as well. And Helen, who's again shy of 3 months, is crying. And one of the soldiers said, well, the only way to stop her from crying is to kill her. And one of the recently released prisoners that the Stams had never met before said, take my life, not hers. And they did. They actually spared Helen, took this man's life, and she became known as the Miracle Child. And of course, John and Betty were forever indebted to this man's heroic act. But the very next day, John and Betty were marched miles and miles to a downtown in China, where the streets were lined with people, and they were murdered and martyred for their faith right there in front of everyone. And so that's where the story feels like a tragedy, but the book title says a story of triumph. And this is triumph because sweet Helen, the miracle baby, did survive, and their story is impacting lives still to this very day because of how they lived and their motivations for ministry. All the things that they did in their lives are actually still being taught and inspiring people to go on mission today. And so we can learn a lot from this. We can learn a lot from how John was raised by his father Peter. Their family was certainly marked and invested, and when the time came, John would not denounce his faith, and that started with him as a young man. They lived by God's promises. They lived fully surrendered lives. They knew there was quotes in this book that said they knew that this was a possibility the whole time, and they said, to live as Christ and to die as gain. And they lived this open-handed, surrendered life, trusting for God's provision their entire lives. They had lives of integrity, and they ultimately met their mark in this life because they listened to God, do what he said, until the very end, until it cost them their lives. But what an inspiration it was to read about them, their lives, their families, and their call to serve God in a very difficult, tragic way that ended in less than 30 years, but has triumphed. That's ministering here 100 years later. So thank you for your time.